who would want to write a play about the railways? I'm sure, as you say, there are plenty of people just dying to talk about it, but are they actually the people you want to talk to? People who want to talk about the railways are, by definition, nerds.
I love talking about the railways, my disreputable railway past.
Railways were like the economy. The assumption was they would continue to decline. Instead came a period of steady economic growth, unparalleled since the 1950s, and there was a consequent 30% growth in rail usage.
A play? You say a play. You don't maybe think it's more a book?
The economy at the end of the 1950s was pretty much a basket case.
I honestly believe things might have worked out, but when Labour got in, they put John Prescott in charge. It's not a good idea to put someone who is not sympathetic in charge of something which needs to work, because that person will not want it to succeed.
Prescott was deeply damaging. From the very beginning, he was riding the company. The only time I ever met him, he said to me,
"So you're the banker?"
all I could think to say was, "Yes. Sorry."
I think you could say about productivity and the economy that before Hatfield things were modestly better. Not greatly better, but a bit better. And then came the Hatfield crash and productivity is down disastrously. Obviously, all grip has been lost.
I now watch with a layman's eye. Plainly the railway still needs billions, but unfortunately Gordon has to put everything aside for defence.
Do I personally feel guilty? What answer would you like? The Nuremberg defence? I was only obeying orders.
I have a clear conscience.
Plainly you wouldn't start from here if you were planning a railway, but given that you are here, you now have to make it work. The only people who benefited, I'm sorry, I have to take this. The only people who benefited are lawyers and accountants and consultants. Hello, Derek.
I would not have done. I would have driven over it.
The group was formed after the crash. It's a loose group. 80 of us, maybe it's down to 60. There's things that only the survivors remember, like the smell of the scene. And you don't want to describe that in any detail to strangers, but you're able to talk about it amongst yourselves. It was a hard thing for a young woman in her 20s to deal with. It took me a year to 18 months to be able to talk about it at all, and that was only with the help of my psychotherapist.
I called the train from Reading that morning. I was facing forward, and I remember seeing this good-looking girl, so I was eyeing her up in that way you do. I don't know what happened to it. I didn't see her again. Anyway, in a car crash, there's just one almighty bang. But in a train crash, there's a series. And I was holding on to the bar, desperately. It was like being on a ferry at high seas.
I could see Carriage H was on fire. I managed to get out and I called the police from my mobile phone. Apparently I talked for 7 minutes. They put me on speakerphone, but I couldn't answer the most basic questions. I said, "There's been a crash!" But when they asked me where, I didn't know. All I could see of Carriage H was a massive wall of fire and smoke about 20 feet away. Anyway, about 300 or 400 of us escaped and started walking across the lines. And we all escaped, but it's weird what goes through your head. You're worried about oncoming trains or stepping on a live line.
After the crash, I was determined to stay conscious. I took my head out of my hands. I think you just go on autopilot. My right leg was on fire and I just patted it out. The coach I was in, Carriage H, had tilted on its side, and that's when I realised I wasn't on the outside of the crash. I was right in the middle of it. The wreckage was wrapped around me.
A couple of us stood on the side of the track, and you make calculations, like, there were 6 people helping the people from the Thames train, so they won't need me. You don't mean to, but you make calculations like that. There was this guy complaining about a gash in his leg, and I could see there were people dead. So I just told him to shut up and stop complaining. Yeah.
I rang my father to turn on Sky News and Capsule Radio, and I told him I was okay and to ring the office to tell them that I'd be late. Then the British Spirit kicked in. They'd set up a place at Sainsbury's where you could get a cup of sweet tea and a biscuit.
I don't feel I was all there. I had this idea, just crack on, you know? But I went to the pub at the end of the evening because I felt, you know, I deserve a drink, don't I?
I was 3 weeks unconscious in Charing Cross ICU. I was the one expected not to make it because I'd caught double pneumonia and they thought that was curtains. Then they moved me to the National Health Ward because there was nasty viruses going around ICU and I couldn't catch them because of the state my lungs were in, because of the burning. And then, oh God, I was in hospital for 3 months.
The first time the Reading-Paddington train was reinstated, I was on that train. The very first one. It was pretty empty. And then I started commuting again. It wasn't, I don't know, 3 months after the crash that I realised I was having terrible night sweats and my neck went into a spasm. Around April, my fear of the train began to take over. I could feel every jolt, every judder on the train, and I could feel people staring at me, but I still didn't put 2 and 2 together.
I resisted psychotherapy. You're a young woman, you think you can deal with anything. But I had a terrible fear of the trains. I had to quit my job and get one near home because I just couldn't get back on the train.
Afterwards, I asked someone which way to go underground. They said, oh, just down the road and turn right. So I set off. When I got into work, they said to me, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? You were in a train crash, weren't you? And I was doing all right, I thought, just a slight nosebleed. I thought to myself, all the good-looking girls in the office are loving this.
Well, most of us think that it wasn't really the driver's fault because he went through signal 109. Now, I've seen that signal and it is really difficult to see in sunlight. I don't know, maybe, and there have been lots of complaints made about it, so maybe, I don't know, Railtrack just didn't want to spend the money.
Somebody rang me up. They said, put on the telly. I did. It was the list of the dead, so-called. There was only one name, my son's.
I later rewrote the manual because no one had ever handled an investigation this size. Thousands dead. And we had this tape, terrible tape, of the driver crying, saying, I've gone for a red light and I've killed those people. We used to play it at police training courses. Tape of a grown man crying and screaming. We should shut everyone up. The whole room used to go quiet.
They referred to our son as body number 6. I don't think I'd have started campaigning if they hadn't called him that.
You see, there is a difference, inevitably there is a difference, between the way a survivor reacts and how the bereaved react. Because I did ask a psychotherapist, because originally we were getting inquiries from the bereaved, and to start with I was talking to them, but it became apparent that they just weren't on the same page. I mean, they wanted to talk about people they'd lost, which was understandable, but they sort of wanted to dump your emotional baggage on you, and you just ended up thinking, hang on, I've been through a hell of an experience, and I don't need more emotional baggage.
It was my husband's 50th birthday, so we were all going as a family to Portugal. My eldest son, Sam, he was a mobile phone designer based in Slough, and he was going down from London to clear his desk before the holiday. We heard there'd been a crash, so we rang his mobile. He'd always answered.
And then there was to be a public inquiry. And a public inquiry is just a gloss on the top. Asking people to come in and talk about their personal experiences is bullshit. It had to be trained investigations.
We We went up to the mortuary to see Peter. He was lying on a trolley and his nose had come off. They just put it back on. They'd combed his hair into this fringe, and he'd never had a fringe in his life, and he had this fringe. I don't feel I left my son there because it wasn't him. His spirit had gone.
What happened? The bereaved got angry very quickly and they wanted to kill somebody basically. They wanted a scapegoat. But we had to keep saying, look, there is no one individual who sat down that morning and said, I know, I'm going to crash a train so 31 people will die.
When Concorde crashed, every family got £1 million. It's not the money, it's just so you don't ever have to think about it again. 3.5 years later, we're going to meetings to establish what they call VOL, value of life. Each child, they say, is worth a different value. Maybe £10,000, maybe 20. The other day, to establish the value of Sam's life, the value of Sam, they asked me, so how much did he spend on Christmas presents? How does it make a parent feel to be told that because his son is a road sweeper, his life is worth less than that of a brain surgeon?
And then there was to be 2 weeks technical discussion. And afterwards the judge says, no, there's no such charge in English law, because to prove manslaughter, you need a controlling mind. And everyone knows that on the railway there's no controlling mind. And that was it.
We were ushered into a room and we were told. Everyone around the table was dumbstruck. We didn't want blood or guts. We didn't want anyone hung or crucified. We just wanted someone to stand in the dock. That's all we expected. And we were told, the law is not right for this.
In fact, there were briefly a couple of survivors who were militant. One of their ideas was to set fire to the chairman of rail track on the steps of the inquiry. They came and went very quickly because by then, and there were about 81 of us, I think, we didn't really want revenge.
You know, perhaps all this isn't going to solve anything. But you go on. Our son would not put anything down. Sam, he had this thing. He was persistent. He kept going until something was perfect. If there was a puzzle, he kept going until he solved it and got it perfect. Tories don't like railways. Oh, of course they don't. They don't like buses. They don't like any form of transport you have to share. Because on a bus, you might hear an opinion, not your own. It spoils your world view. In a car, whatever you believe, there's no one to tell you otherwise.
Problem with the trees and the Labour government is interesting. I'll tell you why it's interesting. It's interesting because the Labour government does everything except address the problem. It does everything except address the fucking problem. And why won't they do that?
Why do we all want to fuck the plumber? What's the fantasy here? It's not the 1950s. There aren't people called housewives anymore who sit around all day in our 90s bored out of our minds. Not anymore. But women still want to fuck plumbers. And why? Because the plumber knows what he's doing. That's why. The plumber knows.
Here's what I feel. I feel we're all doing our best, but it isn't working. Every day, everywhere, we're all trying terribly hard. And every day we're told, we need to change our ways. The way we are now isn't working. People come up with new schemes all the time, but mysteriously it doesn't get better. Why not?
What do we ask of life? That sudden should work? How beautiful it is when a workman arrives on time, does the job and leaves. How beautiful that is. What was Diana's complaint? Do you remember? She lacked a business plan. Nobody sat me down with a piece of paper and said, this is what is expected of you.
People die on the roads all the time, for God's sake. I mean, let's be honest. Let's be clear. Every day, they die on the roads. 3,450 people die on the roads every year. And yet, 4 people die on the railway, and suddenly, it's a crisis. I don't get it. How come 4 is a crisis, 3,450 isn't. Because, as far as I'm concerned, it don't matter. None of it matters. Because they're squashed on the road, or they're thrown into the railway cutting. Why should it matter how they die? Why should that matter? Because they're still dead.
In London, you have a tube strike, and nobody gets angry. You tell me what that's about. Everybody's standing there, you can't get into work, you can't go to work, and they just say, oh yeah, that's how it is, that's how we are. And it wouldn't be hard. It actually wouldn't be hard to make it work.
They say, no one has the right to attack the staff of the London Underground. I don't get it. I would have thought that was one of the last remaining sources of satisfaction to the travelling public. Why can't we attack them? It's better than just standing there, waiting for the fucking train.
Why aren't they angry? Why aren't people angry? They were robbed.
Nobody gave me a piece of paper and said this is what is expected of you.
What's the point?